welcome to Talking HealthTech, Stefan. It's great to have you here today. How you going?
I'm good. I'm good. Happy New Year, and thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So look, let's jump right into it because I'm pretty excited about this one actually. So I've been looking a bit into DermR Health, and yeah, I was just wondering if we could hear a little bit. I mean, we'll start off. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what inspired you to create this, and yeah, where'd the ideas come from? Dive into that.
So, well, I guess it comes down to the origin story. Everybody has to have an origin story. Look, honestly, ours was purely accidental. I never set out to look for anything in the cancer space. That really wasn't my specialty. But what actually happened was about 4.5 years ago, my mum actually had a suspicious lesion on the side of her nose. Like it literally looked like a flake of skin. And I have a skin background, and so yeah, she asked me what it was. I'm like, don't worry about it; it will just go away, as one does. You just dismiss it. And so she did that, and it sort of went away and came back for about 12 months. Now, on the other side of all this, her background, she has a phobia of needles, so she would generally put off getting anything done. So, from one side, you didn't really want her to go get something checked out if it wasn't really necessary. But what actually happened was after about 12 months, it started to honestly get a bit more recurring. And so she finally did go see a doctor and face her fears. And the doctor suggested to get a skin biopsy to figure out what was going on. So unfortunately, the doctor made a mistake the first time. So she had to go back a second time to face her phobias and get a biopsy. And it turned out to be an aggressive BCC, so basal cell carcinoma. And in order to remove it, she had to undergo Mohs surgery. And for those of you who don't know what Mohs surgery is, basically it's a surgical procedure where somebody goes in, they cut around the lesion, they then send it off to histopathology to get it tested to make sure they've captured all the cancer cells. And if they haven't, they go back in and they do more cutting around the diameter of the lesion. And they keep repeating that process until it comes back as all clear, so we know it's all gone. So I didn't know anything about this procedure. And so afterwards, I found out that it was actually quite an aggressive treatment. She ended up losing cartilage around her nose. She then needed reconstruction surgery and developed sleep apnea, which now affects her for the rest of her life. And this all started from literally something that looked like a little pimple on the side of her nose. And you sort of often wonder, my mom's got dark olive skin. She's Mauritian. You never associate skin cancer with a beautiful olive complexion. And I know we're in a sunburned country, but you never really understand the impacts of skin cancer until it hits home. And this was truly the first time I actually experienced such an extreme form of skin cancer. And from that moment on, I started to look at, is there another way of understanding a way to diagnose skin cancer? I went down a bit of a rabbit hole. And what we found out is that no, there is literally no other way to diagnose skin cancer other than a biopsy. And so I wanted to set out to find a way of, creating a triage solution where we could figure out if a person actually has skin cancer far early on. And this sort of ends up with a 4-year journey to get us to where we are today.
So one thing I wanted to touch into a little bit, because I think it's one of the interesting parts that I was looking through when I looked up who you are and a bit about the company. You mentioned, your background. Can you tell me a bit about who you are? Who is Stefan and where have you come from to drive some of this?
That's a very deep question, isn't it? Discovery. No. Look, I am a bit of an oddity, so I'm a bit of an outlier. But look, I think I'm a researcher at heart. So back when I was 19, I actually developed a DNA test for skin aging. So we were able to identify how the skin will age before it happens. And I developed algorithms that can map ingredients to any skincare brand on the market. And it just so happened that it was the world first. And we actually created the whole direct-to-consumer skin genomics industry. So it's very much ingrained with that educational process because science is one thing, but getting a consumer to understand genomics, it's a whole different ball game. But flash forward to today, so I still have the company, so it's 15 years on, and that technology represents about 70% of all DNA testing skin products globally. So every skincare brand that has some sort of DNA test, our technology is sort of the underlying thing powering it. So we're sort of like the hidden company that nobody knows about, and that's fine. And we sort of help other companies with education.
Fantastic. Really, really interesting. So I guess like diving into the company a little bit before we sort of unpack, everything that you've achieved and accomplished. Like what sets DermR Patch apart from traditional cancer diagnostic methods? Why is this new and exciting, and why should our listeners care?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and it's one that I've struggled with a lot, because the more I looked into it, it honestly turned out to be one of the biggest elephants in all of healthcare that nobody is talking about. It is smack bang in our faces, and people just accept it. I think that's really what motivated me. So basically, to date, there is no other way to diagnose skin cancer. You have apps, you have mole mapping, you have all these services that take photos of images. You have dermoscopy, which is where the doctor looks at it through a microscope. But the reality is they are not diagnostics. They are all guesswork. And the only way to actually get definitive diagnosis is to get a piece of tissue and to send it off. Now, the problem with this, especially not even just with Australia, globally, the problem with it is that it is still guesswork. So doctors have to they have to diagnose, because if they dismiss a lesion, it turns out to be cancer, there's a lawsuit. Australia is one thing, but America, it's like it's crippling. And here we have a really big problem where we're now faced with around 40%, or at least 40% of all skin biopsies are actually benign, negative, and they could have been avoided. And for context, we're talking about 700,000 avoidable skin biopsies that were performed in Australia just last year. And that cost our healthcare system over $400 million just by having like no other way to diagnose skin cancer. And when we sort of extrapolate the numbers globally, it's not just Australia that's the problem. Skin cancer is the leading global cancer everywhere. It's impacting every single healthcare system. And it's not about the actual cancer rates. It's about the biopsies. 40% of biopsies globally could be avoided. And so you have a really big problem in every single healthcare setting that people have just seemed to accept that, I'm just going to get a biopsy to figure out if I've got cancer. But I think when we start looking even further, again, I went down a really big rabbit hole through all of this, we start looking at the statistics. So like every single skin cancer statistic available. So if you go to the Skin Cancer Foundation, if you go to the Melanoma Institute, if you go to any single foundation, even the WHO, all of their statistics about skin cancer rates are grossly inaccurate. And the reason is that the data quality behind it is flawed. So to give you an idea, in Australia, whenever somebody has a suspected skin cancer, a biopsy is performed. Now, through Medicare, there's a specific item code, and that item code is classified as a second opinion. So we have to get tissue, we get a second opinion to get it sent off. Now, I don't know what happened along the way, but everyone now classifies a second opinion as an actual skin cancer case, which is inaccurate. And so when you look at these stats, they're saying that there's over 1.4 million skin cancer cases in Australia last year. That's really inaccurate, because there's been 1.4 million biopsies for a second opinion. The true number of actual skin cancer cases are about 700,000. And so we've now got this big issue where data ever is just inaccurate. And so we need to find a solution where we can actually come up with a way of not only diagnosing better, but giving accurate information so we can actually make more informed health decisions, even with budgets.
So how is it that the DermR Patch supports that? Like I understand data capture, data capture is, dependent on what you can, how you get it and how you present it. So how does DermR Patch help?
So we're in it's a very interesting technology. So effectively, we look at what fundamentally makes up a biopsy and a diagnosis. So right now, a biopsy is a very large piece of tissue that's cut. It's cut out and is sent to a pathologist. And what pathology does is they slice up the tissue. They put it under a microscope, a digital microscope for medical imaging. And a histopathologist physically looks at the image, looks at the cells, and has to manually think to themselves if it is skin cancer and what type of cancer. Doing these one-off, completely fine. But there are 1.4 million of those done last year. Human error is absolutely inevitable. And there are so many other backlogs associated with skin cancer. And so where the DermR Patch comes into this is that we've created a microsampling tool where it can be applied onto a lesion for about 30 seconds. It can then be sent off also to pathology. But instead of doing histopathology where they look at big cells and medical imaging, we've actually developed a DNA test. kind of like the at-home bowel cancer screening or the breast cancer test, where we can identify if there are any genetic anomalies in the actual live tissue that is an indication of that tissue being cancerous. And it's a simple triage process. It is a yes or it is a no. Are there any gene markers that are associated with cancer in this tissue? Yes, then let's get a biopsy. Are there not? Then no. Following treatment of care, it is standard surveillance, and you look over this for the next 6 to 12 months. And that simple approach literally can reduce biopsies by about 600,000 cases just in Australia.
Right, understood. And this process of it being analysed, so understanding for our listeners, you use the patch and it can say, yes, there's anomalies, we will biopsy, and then they go down the traditional pathway anyway that still requires histopathology and all of that. But for those that don't, can move down the monitoring side. That assessment piece that, you've put the patch on, like, is this an automated process? I'm just thinking about like the infrastructure, the logistics of how that all works. Is this done in clinic? What's the turnaround? Like, how does that look?
Yep. So one of the things that we had to figure out is how to get easy implementation. So it's one thing to have a novel solution. It's another to get mass adoption. And most things fail because nobody can pick it up. So we really have to look at workflow. Now, our workflow works in the exact same way as like a blood test. So you would go to the doctors right now, you get a blood test. So just like with that, if you had a suspected skin cancer, the doctor wasn't certain if it was cancerous. So they then apply the patch. It gets put aside with all the blood samples. And the end of every day, the pathologist would come through, they would collect the blood, it would go to pathology just with the samples, and it would go down their workflow. Now, the benefit with what we're doing is that our solution is more automated over a biopsy. So if you look at biopsies, they have to be sliced. There's a lot of manual work. With us, we're doing DNA, and it uses a standard PCR workflow. And the reason why we know that this works really well and can be automated is because it's very much the same workflow that they did the COVID testing. So it's a PCR test. And so they've already got the infrastructure to automate that whole process. And that's the pathway that we're looking to fit into.
Fantastic. And so I guess really, really interesting and novel approach you're taking in this space. So, I mean, one of the things that was really interesting to me reading your write-up was some of the milestones, even just in the last year, stuff from Sakar, the Tech 23, biotech. Like, tell me what some of the accolades and things, because it's looking pretty impressive here.
Look, it's been a journey.
Yeah.
And look, I think one thing that probably sets us apart is that we are still a startup. We are not affiliated with any university. We're not affiliated with any major organization, which means fundamentally we're kind of a little bit alone. It's not a bad thing. It means that we can move really quickly. We have no policies to deal with. So it's good. But on the flip side, we're probably limited. Maybe 80% of grants for any available funding, we're probably not eligible for because we don't have that affiliation.
Oh, shit, yeah.
And I think why we sort of chose to go as public as we did, is, I guess being more vulnerable and really talking about the why has really got people like interested in what we're doing, because every day I speak to people, about 40% of skin cancer biopsies are benign. Every single person has a story about, I went to get this done and it wasn't cancerous, and they've never made that link. And so we wanted to make this a public thing, because I'm like, my mom can't just be the only person that has gone through this.
Yeah. And
look, through a lot of support, we've actually started to get a lot of traction. We need the funding, and in order to get the funding, it's all about the exposure. And what a great story to tell that, we're a sunburned country and we've literally invented a new way to diagnose skin cancer. I mean, that's newsworthy. That's something that can actually change the system. And so through that, we've been very fortunate. We were part of the Cicada Tech 23 deep tech companies this year. So for those of you listening, there's like a founder talk where I speak for about 10 minutes about how it can revolutionize the healthcare system. One of the bigger ones as well was the Australian Technologies Competition Biotech of the Year. That one was actually more about the business plan. So you have a whole bunch of like VCs and investors to actually review your go-to-market strategy. We can now say we have an award-winning go-to-market strategy. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then the big one here was South by Southwest. So, we actually took out the pitch grand final, a shock to me, because we're up against some really, really awesome companies. And it just goes to show that, this is such a people product, and there are so many people supporting us that we want to get this to market, and we're kicking and screaming and being as loud as possible to let people know what we're working on.
And it's really, like you say, I can see it just really resonating well with people, particularly in Australia. So what a great place for this to have sort of come out of. I mean, I guess the thing I am thinking is your evidence base, you're building the proof and those sorts of things. Like I can see some challenges without having those affiliations, whether it be with medical research institutes or universities or whatever it might be. Like, how are you grappling some of that evidence based stuff?
Oh, that has been a challenge. So while my background is business, I mean, this is a heavily medical-based device. And I think one of the major challenges that we've had over the 4 years is, where is your clinical proof? Where is your clinical validation? Where is your clinical trial? Where is your clinical study? Everything is clinical. Now, what we've learned is that in order to do a clinical trial, you need to get ethics approval, which means you need to have a hospital that is willing to work with you to support you through that whole program. Now, having no affiliation, you can't exactly rock up to a hospital and say, hey, we've got a new way to diagnose skin cancer. We think it's going to work, but we need to try it on people with cancerous lesions. Sydney, nobody will talk to you. And so that was one of the hurdles. It's also quite expensive. It was like $200,000 or $300,000 just to do a little clinical trial. So it's not like we have these freedoms. But on the flip side, I think being resourceful and being sort of on the outside, it allowed us to really look at some unique funding opportunities to get really creative. And I think one of the things that changed the full trajectory of our company was this program, which not a lot of people know about, but it was called the Pilbara Challenge over in WA. And it was offered by Minister Stephen Dawson, who is head of medical research and innovation. And it was in partnership with BHP and Rio Tinto. Now, effectively, it was 12 months where you get placed in the Pilbara. And the idea was that they were looking for solutions that could reimagine rural and remote healthcare. You got a very, very small amount of money to help fast track a proof of concept. And one of 10 companies would win $5 million at the end of it. Spoiler alert, we didn't win, but we're like Jessica Mauboy, where you don't win Idol, but you end up being the most successful out of all of them. What we learned through that was that was our one opportunity for that somebody gave us a chance. They saw that we were a high-risk innovation, but it had grounds. And so through that 12 months, we were ingrained in the Pilbara healthcare system. We understood the public healthcare system. We were able to shadow dermatologists and nurses. We were able to meet with so many different stakeholders. And to add an extra boundary, it was rural and remote. Like when we talk about remote, it is, I had to look up where we were going when I got there because I didn't know where it was. And so over 12 months, I mean, what we were able to do was we developed full clinical protocols. We got our ethics approval. We got our governance. We did recruitment, and we ran a full clinical trial all within 12 months. And speaking to people, and we didn't realize what we did. To me, it was like, how do we get there as quickly as possible? Just do it. Nobody has ever said that they've come across any other company that has been able to do what we've done in 12 months, ever. And we even worked with a couple of consultants who'd been in the ethics for 20 years. And I go, we don't know anybody who's ever done this. So I never realized at the time. And there's a lot of help. There's a lot of support to help us get there. But it was through that process, that belief, I think, that drove us. And at the end of that 12 months, even though we'd been working on it for 3 years, that 12 months at the end, it gave us access to patients with skin cancer. We're able to validate our solution against an actual biopsy and the standard treatment of care. And by the end of it, we literally validated a whole new way of doing something that hasn't changed in over 100 years. And that was only like last year. So it's been a very, very big 12 months. Yeah, and I think that has just caused that snowball effect for people to really understand and think that or believe in our technology.
Yeah, no, and credit to you, mate. It's no small feat to do that in 12 months. So quite a strong research background myself. So yeah, no, well done. It's
anxiety attack. Before I had my third anxiety attack of my life was in the Pilbara. So I get the street.
Okay. I had hair when I started my PhD. So look, I mean, there's some really great things here, and it's, I guess, just in the results. Like, so you mentioned that you validated, so you were happy with the findings. Like, it lined up. Was there any outcomes that you needed to tweak? Like, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your findings? Or
So look, I'm not gonna lie, it was very stressful. To me, it was the one and only chance we had to prove ourselves because we weren't able to get an opportunity like that. And so for the 3 years prior, what we've been doing is all about optimizing our microneedles, optimizing sample collection and protocols. So like we knew our patch could collect tissue. We could we could number behind it. We knew it was suitable for gene sequencing. So we knew all that. But what was missing was actual cancer patients. Like that was what we needed.
Yeah.
And so what we were able to do was we did an interventional study. And so the dermatologist would have a suspected skin cancer. They would tell the patient, look, we need a biopsy or we need an excision because we think it's cancer. Yeah. And so with all of those cases, we before they cut, we came in, we got the nurses to apply the patch. We did a few of those collections, and then the biopsy was taken out. The biopsy went to pathology. Our samples went for gene sequencing. And at the end of it, we were able to confirm that the genes of interest that we were looking at matched up the outcome of the biopsy. Yeah. Personally, I was happy. I would be happy with one outcome. If everything else failed, just one, everything would be fine. But with all of them, even though it was a small study, I think we had about like 20 samples at the end of it. We had about a 95% success rate in sample collection. And 100% match rate in terms of biopsy outcomes, which completely floored me. It was like I knew it would work, but until you actually put it on there and you figure it out for yourself. So yeah, it completely floored me.
No, that's just really great, and I would counter your one and only chance, because if you really are seeing these outcomes, I've no doubt you're going to have other opportunities for validation and things moving forward. So really, really impressive stuff. So, Stefan, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you see the future? You know, how is DermR Patch going to transform the healthcare system from the rising demand for better diagnostics amongst GPs and in other settings?
So here's what's interesting about the DermR Patch. I mean, a lot of what we're doing is about skin cancer, and skin cancer is a huge talking topic. But how we can actually change the healthcare system is, I think, something we really need to focus on a lot more. So, for example, most countries, only doctors can perform biopsies. So for skin cancer, only a doctor can diagnose because they need to do a biopsy. There's no other way. Now, when we look at this, there are 600,000 patients last year that had an avoidable biopsy just in Australia. There were 600,000 appointments that could have gone to people with more pressing health concerns. That's just in Australia. Now, we hear about the government trying to, invest billions of dollars in new infrastructure or try to upskill people because of skill shortages. But it's a mathematical problem in the healthcare system. It's a triage issue. If we can literally reduce 600,000 people from seeing a doctor and move them somewhere else, that is going to have a greater impact on the healthcare system than any new hospital is ever going to have. On top of that, when we look at how this process is done, we're also activating untapped workforces that, in my opinion, are probably more skilled at skin than a GP. So our solution can actually be administered by nurses. So we've got lots of RNs in hospitals that are in burn and wound clinics that literally look at skin every day, and they can see if there's a problem. We are talking with cosmetic clinicians who are already nurses who see skin day in and day out. You even got the New South Wales government who have TAFE programs for hairdressers called Spot the Spot, where you can certify yourself to understand if there's a melanoma or a BCC. But the problem with all these cases, you might spot an issue, you still have to send them to a doctor, and most of the people won't really go. And so with our solution, it's a triage. So we're not saying to avoid a doctor. We're saying, let's take this step first. If there is an issue, then we go to a doctor with a proper case. And that's how we start to alleviate all the burden, all the stress in the healthcare system. And this issue is not just Australia, it's globally. Every healthcare system, only doctors can do biopsies. Now, the other side of this is we have a really big pressing problem coming up by 2030. Now, by the year 2030, which is literally 5 years away, there is in Australia going to be a 25% decrease in GPs. There's also going to be a 30% increase in skin cancer cases. So within 5 years, there is already going to be a shortage, and something needs to be done to address that.
Yeah, no, and look, anything reducing the burden of our GP and our healthcare systems, something worth exploring for sure. So look, I would like to start to wrap things up a touch here, but we've joked about hair loss and stress and all of those things. But I guess for those who are listening, what keeps you motivated as an entrepreneur And what advice would you give to those looking to innovate in medtech? Or another way to look at it, what would you have told yourself 5 years ago when you're about to start this journey?
Oh, good question. All right, look, from personal experience, and I have told this a few times to a few people, look, medtech or even starting your own innovation or business, it is the hardest thing you can possibly do in your entire life. It's probably something you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy, but it's also the most rewarding experience that you could ever go through. You see things that nobody will ever see. You experience things that most people never, ever experience. And that part to me is far more rewarding. I mean, 99% of the background, you've got all the stress, all the anxiety, like what to do next, how to pay people. I have $1, I've got 5 things I've got to pay, like all that stuff. I mean, that's part of life. That 1% where we get to talk about it, that's pretty cool. But it's a challenge. I think for me, I think I've got like an obedience issue. When somebody says no, I'm like, watch me. And I think that's really been my motivation the whole time. Like when people say you can't do this because from an engineering perspective, there's no way of collecting tissue, I'm like, watch me. And so the more people that say no, I think that's my drive. And I think lately, the more people or the more exposed I've been, I've had a chance to really hear some stories. And, while skin cancer isn't deemed as like a big thing, the emotional toll it has on so many people, whether it be BCC or melanoma, I've lost track of the number of people that have got a little bit emotional telling me their stories. And I think that in itself has been my new drive. Like it's for me, it's never been about money. It's about we are working on something that can actually help people and change people's lives. And I am here to do everything I can possibly do to get that to market. I think that's probably why we've had such a crazy journey, because we're literally doing everything we can to get to market, going down the most unconventional routes, because the traditional ones just aren't working for us. We have no affiliation, so we can't have access to NHMRC and all the those great platforms. So I think just being unique and different is what's pushing us forward.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really interesting one, and hope our listeners got a lot out of it. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.